right, welcome back. So we're here for our keynote speaker, and I'm going to introduce our host for this evening, Morgan Miller. Morgan is a graduate of the Sports Communication and Media program and has done freelance and done play-by-play and sideline reporting at local universities. When she landed a full-time job as one of the social media correspondents for NBC Sports, working in the football shows. Her work includes Football Night in America, Sunday Night Football, Chris Sims Unbuttoned, and Pro Football Talk, as well as field-produced content and content creator for NFL content at NBC Sports. We welcome Morgan Miller.
Thanks, guys. So you guys got to hear a little bit about me, and I am here with Ashley, who is unbelievably talented, has an incredible career for someone first so young, but as a woman as well. So I kind of just want to open up the floor to you to kind of tell us about your journey. You can start as far back as Auburn if you would like. You can start kind of ESPN. Just how did you get to be sitting in this seat next to me today?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys for allowing me to be here, Lauren for setting this up, and my girl Camila for introducing the opportunity. I'm happy to be here, and the alumni panel was really great, and obviously you guys have a great program here, and you saw some success stories from everybody who was up here earlier, so you guys are in good hands here. So I knew I wanted to be in the sports industry starting in high school. I started working for my school's yearbook as a photographer. And I liked being on the field, I liked being out there and doing the photography side of it. And then we had a high school TV station and didn't get accepted into that. And so stayed on the photography side. Ended up going to Auburn University, majored in media studies while I was there. And my end of my freshman year is when the SEC network started. So ESPN kind of came in, built control rooms, and they started working with us as students, and we were able to get that experience in the control room, on the field as camera operators, producers, replay operators, pretty much every position you can think of in a control room we were given the opportunity to do. So I did that for my first 2 years at Auburn, and then as a junior, I got an internship with ESPN, working in the control room in Bristol. So while I was up at my internship, I pretty much walked in on day 2, similar to kind of what everybody else was saying up here, like you tell people what you want to do and you kind of make that known. So on day 2 of my internship, I was like, I don't want to be in this department that I'm interning for. I want to be a director. So I set up meetings with the directing department and started kind of networking, doing my internship. That's the most important part, is you have to do your job that you're assigned to and be really good at it in order to be considered for other opportunities. So you never want to lose focus of that. So I did my internship job to the best of my abilities and tried to be as successful in that as I could, so that way when the opportunity in the directing department opened up, they could go back to that department and say, hey, she did a really nice job, like you guys should hire her. So networked and kind of told the directing department, like, listen, I want to be a director in your department one day. Ended up finishing my internship, didn't physically go back to Auburn, finished my classes online and started working for ESPN in remote operations as a replay operator. Did that for a few months, and then an associate director position was opened up in Charlotte. Started in Charlotte like right when I graduated as an associate director, was down there for a little bit, and then transferred up to Bristol as an associate director, and then eventually promoted to director. The shows that I work on primarily the studio side, and then you have the game side. So studio side, I mostly do SportsCenter, Daily Wager, NCAA selection specials, and then also the studio side for college football, basketball, and then a few other sports like NHL. And then I also do the game side. So working on the live event side for college football, college basketball, college softball, baseball. I did NBA Summer League, and then Little League. So
amazing. So your resume is stacked. I'm going to take you back to you're at Auburn. SEC Network comes in. A lot of the kids here are undergrads. So what can you say? And you're lucky that the SEC Network was just starting. You were able to get your foot in the door here. All of our D1 sports here are broadcasted through athletics or SEM on NEC networks. There's a lot of opportunities for kids here to get their hands in different positions. What advice can you give for somebody that's just starting out, again, doesn't really, maybe not know exactly what they can do? Is it try everything? Is it get really good at one thing? What is your advice when it comes to working in college, especially in undergrad?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say yes to everything. No matter what the opportunity is, if it's something that you think you're interested in, if it's something you know you're not interested in, I would still do it. There have been a ton of opportunities that I had absolutely no interest in, but something else came out of that opportunity, be it a connection, learning what I wanted to do. When you do something, even if you realize you don't want to do it, all that's doing is solidifying that that's not what you want to do, and it's helping you narrow that down and determine what you do want to do. So whatever opportunities you guys are given in the control room as a camera operator on the field in front of the camera, I would say do it all. That was something that I tried to do when I was at Auburn, just to kind of determine, okay, this is in fact what I don't want to do. That's kind of the process in my mind that I took, but I would say even when you leave here, no matter what the opportunity is, apply to every job, apply to every internship that you can find. Even if it's not what you want to do, it can open the door for something that you do want to do, and those connections are made through the opportunities that you get. So,
completely agree to all of that. Say yes to everything. You get to work, you're really lucky, you get to work on both the studio side and the live event side. Talk to me a little bit about the differences in those, maybe some positives, some negatives about both sides, which one you like better, or maybe you like them both the same, just kind of what are the differences between the two?
Yeah, so for the studio side, I would say the way that I think about it is it's almost like you're using two different sides of your brain, and while you're doing the same thing, they are both very different. For the studio side, I think it's a lot more controlled. It's a controlled environment. You have a rundown that you're working off of, and you are set to kind of this day that is scheduled out based off of what's happening in the sports industry, unless breaking news happens and then everything just hits the fan and then you don't have a rundown anymore, and those are probably the most fun shows that you have. So I would say on the studio side, a lot of it is more creative, and you go in and are basically taking the content that the producer is giving you and determining visually how you want to execute that. Whereas on the game side, a lot of it is more reactionary, and you are kind of at the will of whatever happens in that game. The studio side, a lot of it, actually all of it, is day of preparation. You come in and you know what the storylines are for the day. You start out with a show meeting, you go through everything that the producer wants to put in the show, you talk to talent, determine how you want that show to be shot. Whereas on the game side, a lot of my work is done prior to the day of the game, where you're putting together headshot sheets, depth charts. You have coaches meetings, like for football, you're meeting with the head coach, the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator on Zoom meetings, kind of talking about the different players and what you want to show during that game. And those are for me, but more for the producer, because a lot of their content comes out of those meetings. But it's good for me to kind of know who the key players are, who the star players are, storylines outside of the sport itself. Like ESPN, I think, does a good job of talking about the things that are happening off the field with players, family situations, stuff like that. So everything on the game side kind of happens before the game, and then the day of the game, I have my camera meeting, I'm basically going through with the camera operators and telling them what I want them to shoot, how I want it to be shot, their assignments, and then the game starts, and it's, again, all reactionary, and you're kind of just determining how you want to shoot that game. I think a lot of this industry, but more specifically this role, is very subjective. There are some things that are objectively right and objectively wrong, but for the most part it is subjective, just based off of how you visually see things and determine that you want to shoot things. So I would say those are the key differences. One is definitely more scripted, and you know what you need to do unless breaking news happens, and then the other one is much more reactionary based off of the game.
That's amazing. So kind of going back to what you're saying about your vision versus, right, wrong, but it's more your vision. What are some key aspects or things that you did to help kind of create your own vision? What can people that are just getting into directing or producing or any kind of thing that are wanting to find their own style? Do you have any advice for people that are looking to find their own style, vision, that kind of stuff?
I'm still trying to find my style. It comes over time. I think starting out as an associate director, you kind of latch on to directors that you admire. I had one director that I worked with for a majority of my time as an associate director, and I look back and realize that I picked up a lot of things from him in the way that he shoots things, and he likes to remind me of that. And I think every show that I do, you go in with a philosophy of how you want to direct it, but you also have to understand that things aren't going to happen the way that you want them to, and it's going to be a different show than you planned. I also try to be very open-minded and flexible with the way that I determine how things are going to be shot. For example, like the three main transitions when you're directing are a dissolve, a cut, and a wipe. There's no real right answer. Obviously, you dissolve if it's a serious story. You'd never want to wipe on us. That's one of those objective ones where it's like you would never wipe or cut on something sad or serious. But I also try in the middle of the show to think of different ways that things are going to look depending on how I do it. And so I could easily tell my technical director, all right, stand by to dissolve to this. And then right before I go to it, I say, actually stand by to wipe. And it just depends. So I try to go into every show knowing that it's a learning experience, no matter how many times I've done that show, and can walk away from almost every show saying like, okay, I changed that this time, I liked it, or I changed that this time and I didn't like the way that it looked. But there are things that like you pick up, and for example, like when I'm doing a college basketball game, I kind of tried to find a way to add my own stamp to the show, and that was through using these like graphical elements that we call like sprinkle elements. And so when you'd be rolling out, which was when you're basically taking video to break, I would always stamp it or cap it with these sprinkle elements, which nobody else really used. And so I try to kind of add my own stamp to every show while also being respectful to what the show is. Like SportsCenter is the flagship show, and that show has a very set look most of the time, and you want to respect why that show is that show. And so it's a fine line of like finding your own way of doing it, but also doing it the way that it's supposed to be done.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that that's a big thing, as kind of going off of what you said, that you're still finding your own vision. I think that that's an important thing, that your education or your learning doesn't stop when you leave school, and that every time you do a show, like you just said, no matter how many times you've done the show before, it's going to be a little bit different. You never know what might happen. You can try some new things. There are going to be things that you like, things that you don't like. So to keep that open-minded attitude, kind of going off that open-minded attitude, you know, we're all humans. We all make mistakes. You can give some examples of some mistakes you've made and how they've helped you, how you've overcome them, or just how can you learn from mistakes in a position where sometimes it might feel like the world is falling around you, but you have to take a step back and it's okay. It's a mistake. We're all humans.
Yeah, that's a great question too. My first few years at ESPN, I was absolutely awful at being able to mentally separate my mistakes after the show. I would dwell on them for like days, which sounds really dramatic, but it could be something so small and I'd still be thinking about it 3 days later. And it took me realizing that it's not the end of the world if mistakes happen, and it also took me realizing that a majority of the moments that I learned the most were the situations where I made mistakes. Because once you make a mistake, the chances of you doing it again are pretty small. So I think walking into any show, there are going to be mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. Other people are going to make mistakes. I think I realized that when it comes to other people making mistakes, I was giving them empathy, but I wasn't giving myself the same empathy. And nobody walks into a show going, all right, I'm going to mess this up today because I want to. Like, things happen, and I realized that for me personally, I needed to kind of extend that same level of empathy that I give other people who are working on the shows that I work on. But again, just realizing that mistakes are those learning moments. Like, I definitely learned the most out of my mistakes. I mean, I can think back to the mistakes that I've made. Like, some of them are super serious, like messing up sales elements and them having to reallocate that to another show. Which is never a good feeling. And then it's little mistakes like accidentally forgetting to say, roll this clip, and hitting a freeze on the air. Those things happen. Every show, there's something that happens. So just walking away, I had somebody tell me when I first started, like, a lot of people in this industry treat it as like we're doing brain surgery, and I think there's a balance there. You want to be serious about it, and you want to take it seriously and do the best and the absolute best that you can do. but we're also not out here saving lives. We're doing television. And the good thing about television is that when you're watching something at home and you see like a glitch or a freeze, most people are sitting there thinking like, that was my TV. That wasn't them messing up. So you kind of just have to find that line of always doing the best that you can, but understanding that like, it's not the end of the world.
I think that's a really, really good way to think about it. And I love what you said about that you would give other people empathy, but not give it to yourself. Because I think a thing that a lot of people struggle with is that, and I think a lot of women specifically struggle with that. You know, a lot of us were saying up at the alumni panel that we feel like we need to be perfect. We feel like we need to be better than X, Y, and Z because we are a woman. And I find that a really good way to put it, that empathy is natural in women specifically, and that you have to learn to give yourself just as much empathy as you give other people. Going off of that, when being a woman, specifically in directing, as Camila was telling us, you are one of the few in the department. What is that like for you, as being not having a lot of people that look like you around in your department?
Yeah, it definitely is something that, for me, going into this industry, I already had it in my head that was the case, which is so bad. That is something that I think is great about something like this, is we're actively trying to change that and show people that it is possible to be a woman in this industry and in the positions that we're in. For me, what that looked like is having a lot of male mentors. And that is something that I want to change, which is why I try to extend mentorship to other women in my department or not in my department, building relationships and connections with people like Camila, and having kind of those confidants in people. For me, because I went into the industry already knowing that that's the way it wasn't ever surprising for me to walk into a control room and be the only woman, or be in my department and be one of 8 out of, I think there's maybe 40-something directors. I think it's 8 at this point. Those numbers may be very wrong, but it's something like that. And we are all also very kind of separated in this department, which is interesting because, like, as a director, I'll work with a Camila as a stage manager or when she's like ADing. But on the directing side, directors never work with directors. So having other women directors, I never see any of them unless I make that time for myself. So we do have like groups and have tried to kind of create a community with women in our department. And for me, it's always this fine line of wanting to acknowledge the difference, but also striving for equality and not wanting to be like, okay, we're different because we're women. Like, you want the equality there. So it's working to actively get rid of those gaps that exist while also not trying to separate yourself from men. You want the equality. I don't know if that makes sense.
No,
but
that's a really good point. It makes perfect sense.
So that, for me, like in the directing department, I think is kind of my experience, and we've been really fortunate to kind of see that percentage of women grow, and the head of our department right now is doing a really great job of actively trying to make sure that we are doing what we have to do on our end when it comes to any type of minority group, be it women, POC, the LGBTQIA community. Like, all of that is kind of what we're trying to close the gap on.
And I think that's so important to talk about, is that, you know, wanting to be treated the same, and the idea that if you pull yourself out and are specifically saying that we're a different group, how do you go about not having that be looked at as different, with on the same tract of trying to support each other? And I think that that's a really interesting way to think about sports in general, is that women want to be created equally. We are created equally. We want to be treated equally in the world of sports, and sometimes that doesn't happen, and I love to hear that at ESPN and the directing that they're trying to kind of bridge that gap in all different sorts of manners. I know at NBC they're really great about, a lot of my coworkers are women, and it's really inspiring to see there being so many women everywhere. Not only are you a woman, you're also very young. So what do you feel like that brings? Because I know it brings a lot to the table, because I'll sit in meetings and I'm young and they'll ask me what a TikTok trend is or what this is, and I have to explain it to them. Youth always brings new knowledge. What do you think that brings to the department, brings to your directing style? Are there difficulties being younger than I'm assuming a lot of your coworkers are?
Yeah, I was listening to you guys talk about that when that question was asked about being a woman, and I've never been able to distinguish if somebody is treating me a certain way because I'm young or because I'm a woman or because I'm both. I think for me, I go into everything with the mindset of tradition, but also things change. Directing can be one of those things where things are traditionally done a certain way, but you can walk in and change those things. On my end, especially because I'm only about 2 years into being a director, you have to respect those traditions and earn the respect to be able to come in and change things. So I am slowly trying to do that with the way that I cut a show, whether it's adding different types of music, adding different types of graphical elements, trying to spice things up, I guess, is the best way to put it. So I think, again, being young is one of those things where you have to already earn respect in the position, because a lot of what this industry is like tenure and experience. And then you add being a woman on top of that, and it just adds another layer to it. So for me, those are two things that I've kind of had to overcome. But I've been fortunate, especially at ESPN and starting in the position that I did, I've never really had an experience where somebody outwardly said something negative about either of those things. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, that's perfect. And I love what you said about respecting the traditions, because there are ways how things have always been done. And just because something's always been done that way doesn't mean that it can't change, but it's been done that way for a reason for so long. And I think that having that voice and being, someone that's young and saying, well, why don't we try this? Or asking why this is done this way. I don't know if you found this helpful. I always try and ask questions. Why is this done that way? Why is this called that thing? Not asking too many questions, but kind of you ask them, you get an answer, and then I think it helps you along. I don't know if you found that in your process.
Yeah, I think asking questions shows a sense of humility also, and that for me was the biggest thing coming in, especially when it comes to the age side of things. Nobody likes somebody who comes in and thinks they know everything, and they don't. So for me, asking questions, but then also having the ability to admit that you don't know what you don't know is really big for me. And I find that you earn a lot of people's respect when you do that, especially that older generation, or the like curmudgeon-y crowd of people who are like, you don't know anything because you're 5 years old. So I think asking questions is huge, again, because it just shows people that you know that you don't know everything. And it also helps, like, you go into a situation and you may think you know something and you ask a question and you're like, wait, I didn't know that. And then it just helps you be better at your job.
It helps your process.
Yes.
I think I was in one of the classes the other day, and I was telling them at NBC, when they take it to commercial on all of our shows, they say Jersey roll. And I sat there and listened to that for 6 months, and I had no idea what it meant. None. So finally the other day I was like, what is Jersey roll? To one of the directors, and she was like, it just means our commercials are all taken out of Jersey, so we're just telling Jersey to roll your break. And I was like, oh, I thought it was an industry term. It's not. It's just something they say there, and it's just those little things that you might not know, and it's not embarrassing to ask. And I think that's something that I struggled with going in at first, was being okay with asking those questions. But I think it really does show that you care, you're interested, and the humility aspect, which is huge. So you were selected as one of Forbes 30 under 30. Yes. How long ago was this?
That came out at the end of November.
Okay, so it was recent, super recent. What does that mean to you? We'll start there, just super simple. What did that mean to you?
It is something that I feel very blessed to have been given the opportunity to be a part of. It is very humbling, and just for me, I think it's a testament to the work that not only I've put in, but then also the people that have helped me as well, and that's something that I tried to really actively recognize. I wouldn't be where I am without the help of the people who have helped me. So for me, that was kind of one of those like catalyst moments of all of the hard work and late nights, sometimes until 4 a.m., not leaving Bristol's campus. the overtime and the weekends and all of these sacrifices that I have made when it comes to relationships and friendships, and seeing family. I don't think I've been home for Christmas since I started at ESPN. So for me, it was more just a really great kind of like moment to be like, all of this has built up to this point. But then also kind of allowed me to take a step back and realize how much outside of myself has gone into my career, which was a good kind of reminder.
Yeah, because there's a lot that go into it. You know, it's not just the hours that you spend sitting in the studio. It's a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about, you know, I think a lot of people in sports, or a lot of people that don't work in sports take for granted going home, seeing your family. You told me you're from Chicago. Does your family still live out there?
No, they're all over the place,
All over
which
the
makes
place.
it harder.
Which makes it harder. My family's from Virginia. It's not as far. It's about 4 hours. But still, it's getting that time to go home. It's not something that we get to do all that often. Talk to me a little bit about kind of what that's been like the last, few years, how holidays look different, because there's a lot of people here that maybe that isn't something that they know, that's a big part of sports. What do you guys do on Thanksgiving, or what do you do on Christmas? You watch football, you watch basketball. There's people that are working those games, and we're not home with our families. So just kind of talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, so I knew going into this industry that that's the way that it was going to be, and I was fortunate to have somebody tell me that and be like, listen, you're not going to ever have a normal life. And that goes all the way up until you hit the executive level, and even the executive level, you have people who are coming in on weekends and sacrificing holidays. Like, there's the business side where things happen that we don't necessarily see that they're dealing with on a constant basis. I don't even want to imagine how many meetings they have on a daily basis. So for me, I, again, started in Charlotte and moved up to Bristol, and in my head, my mindset was, I'm coming up here for work, and it's going to be work-based. I know that I'm going to miss holidays. I know that I'm not going to be able to hang out with friends. I'm going to do that until I reach the goal that I have, which was to be a director. So I separated work and life, which my advice to you guys is find that balance, because I spent 4 years in Connecticut, and obviously still live in Connecticut, but spent the first 4 years up here really only focusing on work, and it caused a detriment to my life aspect. So I think my biggest piece of advice is understand that you're going to make sacrifices, but then also understand that life doesn't stop happening outside of those sacrifices. And it's important to maintain relationships. It's important to see family when you can. Take the vacation time you're given, because my first few years, I barely took vacation because I was so worried that it was going to cause other people to get opportunities that I wasn't going to get. And I think it's super important to make sure that you find that balance, because you will go crazy if you don't. You'll realize at some point that is this job worth it if I'm not also living a life outside of it? So I would say if you go into this industry, kind of set mentally a goal that you want for yourself, determine how you're going to get there, how it's going to affect your life outside of work, and either find that balance or accept it is what it is and reach that goal, and then you can have the life aspect after the fact. But I would say definitely kind of map a plan, and plans never work the way that you want them to. You're never going to get the promotion right when you want to. You're never going to get the opportunity that you want the first time every time. So I would say just find that balance, but also kind of determine what you're going to miss out on in the process and accept it for what it is, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I think that it's a good thing to know. And I think being able to prepare yourself going in, holidays, your holidays they'll look different. Sometimes you celebrate Thanksgiving on a Saturday, and that's okay. Or you celebrate Thanksgiving at work with your work friends, and they make a lovely Thanksgiving dinner, and that's also okay. It looks different for everybody. So something that I think that a lot of people struggle, especially young people in this industry, is comparing themselves to other people, comparing paths. And my thing I always try and say is that this industry isn't linear. You're not going to you're going to plateau. You might dip. What is your advice to people when they're feeling stuck, or they're feeling like, well, that person's doing this person is doing this, why can't I be that?
Yeah, I think for me, in the very beginning of my career, it was really easy to look at like what other opportunities people were getting. I would look at schedules and be like, why is this person getting this opportunity and I'm not? And you realize that that does not benefit you and it will actually just drive you crazy. So I would say, to your point, no path is linear. Everybody is going to have a different experience. You can have your path plotted out and it will definitely not happen the way that you think it will. But for me, it's been focusing on what I can do and what I'm capable of. And I think once you gain a certain level of confidence in your abilities, it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. Somebody else can be great at something that you're not great at, but if you know what you are great at and you can focus on that, then I think that it helps you kind of separate the two and you're not worried about what other people are doing. For me, I never really tried to pay attention to what other people in my department as directors are working on that I don't have the opportunity to work on, unless it's from a mentorship perspective. Everybody has their strengths, and for me, the only time I'm worrying about what somebody else is doing is trying to learn from them and not sitting there thinking about like, well, why are they getting this opportunity and I'm not? That's just, it's gonna drive you crazy if you do that. So again, no path is linear. You can sit there and plan what you want to plan and actively try working towards those goals, but I've had goals that I haven't achieved. And for me, I personally believe that everything happens for a reason, and I look back at what those goals were, and by not getting those, it led me to a different path that ended up getting me somewhere even better. So I try to look at every opportunity that I don't get as just a stepping stone to get something that I do want.
And kind of going off of that, your goal for so long was to be a director. You've reached that goal. Do you, within the directing world, do you have things that you are aspiring to do? What is your, fantasy world dream in the directing world that you could ever do?
Yeah. So for me, I don't want to direct forever, and I've made that known to my management. I definitely want to continue kind of rising and go into management and then eventually get to that creative executive level. So for me right now, I am trying to set up meetings. Camila mentioned Tina Thornton, who is the VP of Content and Creative Surround, I believe, and she kind of rose very fast to the industry. As Camila was saying, she started as a production assistant and very quickly got to her position. So I'm setting time aside to make sure that I'm learning what I can learn in my position about the business side and the way things work, and trying to set myself up for success before that's even a conversation that's fully being had. In terms of the directing side, I think the ultimate goal would be probably to direct something like the national championship. I know the director who has done it for the past, I don't even know how many years, and he's probably one of the best directors that we have at the company. And trying to just learn from him and kind of gain wisdom that he's kind of gained over the years and is willing to impart onto me. So right now, just kind of taking the steps necessary to reach a goal like that, directing college football, not on the national championship level, but slowly building my way up to those higher level games.
And when you're sitting there watching these people, the people that are a little higher up than you, your mentors, what is something specifically that you are looking for, advice that you could give to people as they're sitting there watching somebody that might be in a position that they want to? What are things that they can, my thing is I say I'm a sponge. I just want to soak everything in. What is some of your advice for people that are sitting there shadowing or internship, stuff like that, when they're talking to people, questions they can ask?
Yeah, outside of like how they're directing the show, because that's the first like obvious thing is like, why did you do something this way, or what was your thought process through this? I try to pay attention to how people interact, or how like a director interacts with other people. I would say the biggest part of this job outside of like the actual directing portion of it is the relationships that you build. And I always like to see how people interact with a director based off of how that director treats that person. I've met a lot of people, and there's directors that I've worked with who don't treat people kindly and don't treat people with empathy, and those people who are being treated that way talk, and you build a reputation, and there's a reputation that people don't want to work with you because you're not nice, or because you don't do things, or because you can't take accountability for your mistakes. So I like to look at like those higher level people, like the one who directs the national championship, or somebody like Tina Thornton and how she interacts with people on a daily basis. And there's a notable difference between the people who are successful and the people who aren't as successful, and the difference is how they treat people around them. You gain the trust of your crew, and people want to work for you when you are nice, when you understand that they're human, when you don't yell at mistakes happening, and interact with them on a level that doesn't make you seem like you're higher than them, because nothing happens without everybody.
Yeah.
Like, a show doesn't happen without a producer, it doesn't happen without a TD, it doesn't happen out, like the camera operators. Like, everybody has to come together to make it happen, and there's nobody that's at a higher level.
And I think that's so important in all levels too. I was talking to some of the grad students the other day, and they were asking questions of like, how did you get your job, things like that. And something that I always come back to is that you don't understand how much time you're going to be spending with these people. You really, I mean, again, we're going back to holidays. You're spending holidays with these people. You're eating Thanksgiving dinner with them. Everyone that, most of the people that graduate with a master's degree in media or broadcasting, they know what they're doing. A lot of it is that, do I want to spend 14 hours a day with this person? What qualities do you think, you were kind of saying, treating people how you want to be treated, the golden rule, but what are some other kind of qualities that you look for in a good collaborative team?
I think it's probably all the key qualities that your parents teach you when you're a kid.
Probably,
yeah.
yes.
It's be kind, understanding, be humble. That's a big one. And again, just treating people with empathy and trying to build those relationships. Like, you walk into a control room and you want to get to know the people around you, ask how their family is, how your vacation was. It's not just walking in and trying to achieve the goal of getting a show done, because that's not a fun environment. To your point, you spend a lot of time with these people, and you want it to be something where you walk into a control room and you can be like, what up, guys? Like, we're here. Let's have this good show, and you interact and you have these conversations, because there is downtime. It's not just constantly focusing on the show, and you don't just want to sit there in silence. So I would say building those relationships, and just, again, being cognizant of just understanding that people are human and that we're all doing our job, but we also all have lives outside of here. And again, those core values your parents teach you, those stay with you, and there's a reason why they teach you those. So
It's true.
carry that.
Yeah. So kind of one last question before we open it up to everybody else to ask any more questions. Just what is some advice that you can leave, specifically women in here, when they're going into a job interview, when they're going into their first day at work, just some things to think of, just some things to think through as they're walking through that front door, as they're clicking accept on that Zoom invite, just some things to think about.
Yeah, I think kind of what you were saying, just about being a sponge and walking into every situation, never assuming that you know exactly everything. Walking in and treating people with respect and humility and kindness, all of those core values we were just talking about. But I think the biggest thing is just walking in and being a sponge. You're never going to know everything, and you're constantly learning. And the day that you stop learning is not because the opportunities aren't there to be learned, it's because you've stopped mentally thinking that you have something to learn. So when you walk into any situation, ask questions, ask for advice, look for those mentor opportunities for people who can help you advance your career. I would say that's a big part for me, is finding people that you trust. Because there are going to be untrustworthy people in the industry, and there are going to be people who are out to get you and don't want you to be successful, and it's trying to discern those people, and that comes with, again, building those relationships, listening to how people speak to you and what their goals are for you. So I think that answered your question.
No, that was great. Does anybody in the audience have any questions that you would like to ask Ashley? We have a mic for you.
So first of all, thank you, Ashley, for coming here today. Really great getting to hear everything you have to say. I work on the marketing side at a big company at CVS, so I want to know from your perspective, from a marketing side, how important is it to have everything in line from the producing side as well as the marketing side, so that everything lines up?
Yeah, I think it's hard sometimes to realize how much we all work together. everything is kind of intertwined to benefit the product on television and benefit the company, because at the end of the day, it is a business. So we work with marketing and sales for our shows and have a lot of meetings with them, especially for the higher level events like the national championship, or any of the other events that we do, where we're sitting down and saying, like, are we on the same page about the way that we want to market this? And then a lot of the times for marketing, those are end products from like you guys that come onto our shows, where we're just kind of the ones who are putting it on TV. But there are certain executions in the way that things have to be handled, and so making sure that you're maintaining those relationships with all of the teams that kind of go into making a show is super important. But for me, like especially as an AD, we worked with the sales and marketing team a lot because we're responsible for sales. And just making sure that you're on the same page about things, making sure that you're, again, building those relationships with people on the team, so that way they can call you and say, hey, you guys messed this up, but I know you and I know that that's not who you are, and I know that that was a mistake. So I think for us, like, being in line with those two departments is super important, because at the end of the day, you guys are marketing our shows and our product and kind of getting people and driving people to the shows that we do. So without you, we are nothing, and without us, you're nothing. So it's everybody just kind of has to work together.
Completely agree. Anybody else? Molly?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So I'm currently a junior here at Sacred Heart studying sports communications and broadcasting, and I've had like great opportunities here and outside of school, and sometimes it could get hard like saying yes to everything, because like you said, you want to have a balanced life with your career, your family, your friends, your education. So what are your words of wisdom from your experience specifically that helped you from not like hitting a wall necessarily?
Yeah, so I learned that the hard way. I tried to say yes to everything and overextended myself, and that is not good for your physical, mental, whatever type of health you want to say. So I would say go into your career and your education kind of knowing the key things that you want to take away from it and the opportunities that you want. And that's where, when you go in and you say like, okay, I'm gonna try this position today, and you do it once and you're like, I don't like this position, and then you can kind of check that off and be like, I know that I don't wanna do this, and I can start focusing my opportunities towards the things that I want. I think for a while it is going to be one of those things where it is overwhelming and you're saying yes to a lot of things, but the more that you do that, the more it kind of dwindles down, and the more you realize that this is what I wanna do, and the opportunities that I don't wanna do, I can say no, and I can be like, I'm gonna focus my efforts here. So I would say while you're young and fresh, say yes to everything that you can to a certain extent, and don't overdo it, and find that time. If you're asked to do something on a Friday and you already had plans with friends that you've had for a month, you have to weigh those options and determine if that opportunity is going to be something that is going to help advance your career, or if that's going to be an opportunity that you can get again next week, but you want to hang out with your friends tonight. It is really finding that balance, and it's different for everybody, and it takes time to figure that out. And I would say, like, give yourself grace when it comes to that, because you learn it along the way, and it's never going to be perfect, and you're never going to make the right decision every time. And there have been opportunities that I've said no to, and I look back and I'm like, why did I say no to that? But at the time it made sense. And that's going to happen, and you can walk away from that being like, okay, next time maybe I will take that opportunity. But I, again, believe that everything kind of falls into place as it's supposed to. So give yourself that grace when it comes to making those choices, when it comes to life and work balance. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Making you do all the work, running back and forth, getting your steps in.
Of course. First of all, thanks again for coming. I have a sort of a specific question. You said one of the shows you work on is Daily Wager, right? So I'm just wondering how you're seeing the legalization of gambling in so many states, how that's changing perhaps the work that you do, and then also do you see it changing the industry more generally?
Yeah, so from a like state-by-state basis, that doesn't necessarily affect our show, but we do have a lot of regulations and rules based off of the different leagues and sports. So, for example, like NFL, we're not allowed to show like conference-specific things, but we can verbally write out the names of the teams. Like we can't show logos, but then for like other NFL or other professional sports, like we have the rights to show things. And then it gets a little tricky when it comes to college because obviously the age and stuff like that. And so as I've worked on that show, I've noticed that there is a lot more opening up in terms of opportunities to involve gambling content in our shows. But there are just a lot of rules and regulations, like we can't show any type of gambling, like numbers or statistics or anything that has to do with gambling over certain sports videos because we don't have the right to do that. We have, again, slowly built our way up to where we are now on that show, and I think it's only getting better at this point because, to your point, there are states that are opening it up, and I think these different sports and leagues are realizing, like, this is a way of the world now, and it's just going to become more prevalent. But for a while, and even still, it's kind of like tiptoeing around these different rules of, like, what we can and can't show on television. But it definitely, at least over the past even year, has gotten significantly better.
I can kind of talk. We have a show that we do kind of fantasy football on. They do betting on it and stuff like that. And it's even complicated when it comes to interviewing athletes and having athletes on your show, depending on the season, the league, what you're talking about in that show. Certain athletes, one will just straight up sometimes say, no, I don't want to be affiliated with anything to do with this. And sometimes you just legally can't have them on. So a really fine line, and we actually have meetings like weekly with our, like the people who are in charge of the gambling or our edge content people that come in. They send us like daily emails about stuff. It goes back and forth. It's like you can put this on, the next day you can't. It's kind of an ever revolving door of stuff that's happening.
I would say for me, like when I walk into that show, I don't know half of what we're talking about because I personally don't gamble. So it is a lot of me relying on our graphics producer and our researchers to be like, can I show this or can I do this here? And on that show specifically, like that show versus a SportsCenter, a lot of the times I'm not necessarily waiting on somebody to be like, you can put this topic bar in, whereas on a show like Daily Wager, I will not put it in until somebody tells me I can put it in. So it definitely changes the way that you walk into that show and direct that show from my standpoint, just because the last thing you want to do is break a rule like that.
Yeah, and that's also interesting, just kind of no studio show is the same. Like you were saying before, no two shows are the same. You go in, your process is different before each type of show. Something like a SportsCenter, which is again more traditional, has been around forever, versus these new shows that are evolving daily, weekly, monthly as the seasons change. Just to be flexible. Anybody else? Oh, Nyla.
Do you have a favorite sport or show that you like to direct the most?
I would say on the studio side, my favorite show is SportsCenter. And then in terms of favorite sport to direct, it changes a lot. It used to be baseball, just because baseball is one of those sports where there are so many different scenarios that can happen on a field. Every at-bat, depending on how many people are on base or how many outs there are, it just all changes. But then this last year when I directed college football, I really loved it because it was a little bit more challenging for me. I feel like I know football, but I don't know it as well as other sports. And so it forced me to kind of learn football more in depth and in turn made it fun to direct. So I would say SportsCenter and football right now.
So I know you talked about being young and being a female in the industry, but being so young at such a high level, not an entry-level position, how did you gain that confidence and that respect to walk into a room as an AD from an intern and just say, I'm here, I'm young, I'm a woman, this is what I'm doing?
Yeah, I think that was something that I had to get into the mindset of before I even started, because I knew that it would take time to gain the respect of people around me, being more so young, but then again being a woman on top of that. For me, it goes back to that line of confidence versus humility and towing that line. I, especially as an AD, walked in and would ask the questions that needed to be asked of every position. And I find that when you ask people about their position and want to learn more, it helps you kind of gain their respect, but then also you build those relationships. So for me, building those relationships was probably the biggest part. And that takes time, and it sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. I would say, like for me, I mostly started on the night side, and the night side has a lot more youth than the morning side, because the morning side are people who are more tenured who want to get out of work by 5 p.m. and not be there until 3 a.m. So when I worked on the morning side, it was a lot more kind of like joking around, trying to like schmooze some people and be like, hey, can you get this for me? And kind of intertwining those conversations where you're talking to them about like just being a human rather than like telling them what you want from them for their job purpose. But it definitely, I would say, for the first like 6 months was a lot of just me proving myself, and that just comes with putting in the time and effort to do your job well and correctly, and then when you do mess up, saying like, that's my bad, and again, people kind of give you respect when you're able to be like, that was on me. But it definitely took time, and the more that you do your job and the more that you do your job well, it kind of builds that respect all around. So it's going in with a confidence, but then also going in with humility. And I think I've seen people go in with this blind confidence, and you may do your job well, but you don't really get the same respect from people as you do when you go in and be like, hey, I don't know what this means. Can you explain it to me? And especially if it's somebody who's been at the company for 40 years, they're going to be happy to explain it to you and kind of give you some insight into what they know from their experience. So for me, it was just that line of going in and being like, I'm here for a reason and I earned this and I've worked really hard to get here, but I also understand that there are people who have been here for way longer and probably think that I'm nothing compared to them, and it's building those relationships and being humble at the same time.
And I think that's all we have time for tonight. I think we just all want to say a gigantic thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate you guys letting me be here.
Like we've talked about, sports is crazy. You don't have a lot of free time, and the fact that you took some time out to come and speak here is something that I think everybody here will be thinking about for a long time, and we're really, really appreciative of it.
No, I appreciate you guys.
Thanks. Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you guys. Thank everyone for coming. Thank the panelists. Thank Ashley. Thank Morgan for hosting. Have a great night.